And now we have an on your side recall alert. What dog food from the company From, with 2 M's, is being pulled because it could have metal in it.
The front of a bag of pet food is the part everybody looks at, and it is the part that is allowed to tell you the least. Almost everything on it is governed by rules, which is not the same as saying that it is informative. The rules mostly control how far a company may go in creating an impression, and a company that stays exactly inside them can still put a photograph of a salmon fillet on a bag in which salmon is the 4th ingredient by weight. That is not a loophole. Anybody is exploiting. It is the rule working as written, and the rule is public. Turn the same bag over, and the situation reverses. The back panel is where the regulator does its work, what may be named and in what proportion, what order the ingredients must appear in, which 4 numbers must be declared, how the calories must be calculated, and what the feeding directions must at minimum contain. All of it is prescribed, some of it word for word. The claim being tested in this episode is the one the packaging is designed to produce, that the front of a pet food package tells the buyer what is inside it. It does not, and it was never required to. What follows is every panel the regulation mandates, in the order it makes sense to read them, and what each one is capable of telling you. There is also a change running through all of this that most owners have not been told about. The label is being rebuilt. A buyer standing in a shop today will see 2 different generations of packaging on the same shelf and will keep seeing both for years. The method was documentary. I read the 2024 edition of the official publication of the Association of American Feed Control Officials, which I will call AAFSCO from here on, and within it the model regulations for pet food and specialty. Pet food, working through the regulations in sequence, label format, brand and product names, intended use and nutritional adequacy, the nutrition facts panel, ingredients, feeding directions, the determination of calorie content, descriptive terms, the manufacturer's name and address, and handling and storage instructions. Those model regulations are not federal law in themselves. AAFSCO publishes models, states adopt them into their own feed law, and state and federal officials enforce what their own state adopted. That means the picture varies at the edges, and this episode describes the model rather than any one state's version of it. Where a phrase or a threshold appears here, it is taken from the regulation text. Where the regulation prints something verbatim, it is read as printed. The limits are worth stating plainly before any of it. I assessed no product for this episode. No bag was bought, no panel was checked against its contents, and no company's compliance was examined. Everything here describes what a label is required to say and what it is permitted to say, which is not the same as what any particular label does say. A rule that permits something is also not an accusation that anybody is doing it. Several of the rules below have a generous version and a conservative version, and a great many manufacturers sit well inside the conservative one. The reason to know the rule is not that companies are breaking it. It is that the rule is the only thing standing between an impression and a fact, and a buyer who knows where the line runs can see which side of it a package is standing on. The product name is the most heavily regulated thing on the package, and the rules behind it explain nearly every confusing bag on the shelf. The governing principle comes first. The names of ingredients used in the product name or anywhere else on the label must appear in order of predominance by weight in the product. Flavor names are exempt from that ordering because flavor intensity varies. From there, the regulation sets out tiers, and the tier a product sits in is visible in the name itself once you know what you're looking at. If a named ingredient makes up at least 95% of the total weight, it can carry the name plainly. Water sufficient for processing may be excluded from that calculation, but even then the named ingredients must still be at least 70% of the total product weight. This is the strongest version of a name, and in practice it is what a product called simply salmon or beef is claiming. Drop below that and the rule changes shape. When a named ingredient constitutes at least 25% of the total weight, it may still appear in the name, but only on conditions. Excluding processing water, it must still reach 10% of the product. A descriptor must be attached to it, and the regulation is specific about what that descriptor is for. It must imply that other ingredients are included in the formula. The examples the regulation gives are dinner, platter, entree, formula, and recipe, and that descriptor must be printed in the same size, style, and color as the ingredient name. So the word recipe or dinner or entree sitting beside a meat is not decoration and not branding. It is a legally required signal that the named ingredient may be as little as a quarter of the product. Below that again is the 3% tier. Where a combination of ingredients appears in the name, each named ingredient must constitute at least 3% of the total weight excluding processing water, and all of those names must appear in the same print size, style, and color. Then there is the word with, which does more work than any other word on a pet food package. When an ingredient name appears with a descriptor such as with, that named ingredient must constitute at least 3% of the product weight, excluding processing water. The 3% floor does not apply to claims about nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids, or to condiments. 3% is the whole of the requirement. A product described as with salmon is guaranteeing 3% salmon, and it is doing so entirely lawfully. The regulation then does something that repays attention. It caps how large that word may be printed. There is a table of maximum type sizes for a with claim scaled to the size of the panel it sits on, 1/8 of an inch on the smallest panels, 1/4, 3/8, a half, and on the very largest panels a full inch, and no larger. The word with and the ingredient it names must be in the same size, style, color, and case. Read that backwards and it tells you what the rule is defending against. The regulation is not worried that a company will fail to mention the salmon. It is worried the company will print with salmon in letters large enough that a shopper reads salmon and never registers the with. The countermeasure is a legal maximum on the height of the lettering. The last route is flavor. A flavor designation may appear in the product name when it conforms to an ingredient in the ingredient statement, or is identified by the source of the flavor there, and when the word flavor is printed in the same size type and with equal conspicuousness as the flavor name itself. Substantiation must be provided on request. Notice what a flavor claim does not carry, any minimum quantity at all. Beef flavor requires the flavor to be detectable and its source to be identified. It does not require beef in any particular proportion, and this is why the word flavor must be printed just as large as the word beef beside it. 4 tiers, then, on the same fish: the plain name, the descriptor name, the combination name, and with. A buyer who learns to see which one a package is using can read the approximate proportion of the headline ingredient off the front of the bag without turning it over at all. 2 smaller front panel rules complete it. The words 100% or all or anything similar may not be used in a product name if the product contains more than one ingredient. And unless the product is identified as a stew, gravy, sauce, broth, aspic, juice, or milk replacer, the declared maximum moisture may not exceed 78%, or the natural moisture content of the ingredients, whichever is higher. The ingredient statement is the panel with the strongest reputation and the most consistent misreading. The rule itself is short. Ingredients are listed in descending order of predominance by weight in non-quantitative terms. Every name must appear in the same size, style, and color of type, so no ingredient can be made to look more important than another by typography. Ingredients must be identified by the name established in AAFSCO's official list of common or usual names and definitions of feed ingredients, and anything with no established name is identified by its common or usual name. There is one structural exception worth knowing. A vitamin or mineral premix may be declared in order of predominance by the name vitamins or minerals, followed by a bracketed list of everything in that premix, each in its own order of predominance. 2 things follow from the descending order rule that catch people out. The first is that the order is by weight as the ingredient goes into the mix, which means water counts. Fresh meat is weighed with its moisture in it. A meat meal has had the water removed before weighing. So a fresh meat sitting first on a panel and a meat meal sitting fourth may be delivering comparable amounts of actual protein. And the panel cannot show you that because the panel ranks by weight and not by contribution. The second is that descending order is only an order, and it carries no quantities. An ingredient in first position might be 40% of the product, or it might be 12, and the panel is identical either way. The only quantities anywhere on the package are the ones in the guarantees and the ones implied by the product name rules, which is exactly why the product name rules repay learning. The guaranteed analysis is a short block of figures, and it is the most overinterpreted thing on the label. In its established form, it carries 4: minimum crude protein, minimum crude fat, maximum crude fiber, and maximum moisture. Additional guarantees may be added, and where ash is declared, it is a maximum and follows moisture. Two words in that list do most of the damage. The first is crude, because crude protein is not a measurement of protein. It is a measurement of nitrogen, converted to a protein figure by a fixed factor, and nitrogen in a food does not have to have come from a source the animal can use. The figure is a proxy, it is a reasonable one, and it is not the thing itself. The second is guarantee, because a minimum is a floor the manufacturer is promising not to fall below, and a maximum is a ceiling. Neither is a measurement of the food in the bag. A product guaranteeing a minimum of 26% protein may routinely test at 30. The guarantee has been honored in both cases, and the number on the panel is the same. This is why comparing two foods on their guarantees alone is a weaker exercise than it looks, and why the technique episode on dry matter basis exists. A guarantee stated on an as-fed basis includes the water, so a wet food and a dry food cannot be compared on their printed figures at all until the moisture is taken out of both. The nutritional adequacy statement sits below the bold line that separates it from the disclaimers following the guarantees, and it is the single most informative sentence on the package. It states which life stage the food is claimed for, and it states in one of three forms of words prescribed verbatim how that claim was substantiated, formulated to meet the profiles, animal feeding tests using AAF-SCO procedures, or comparable in nutritional adequacy to a product that was tested. If a food is not claiming to be a complete diet at all, the statement instead reads that the product is intended for intermittent or supplemental feeding only. That sentence has an episode of its own on this channel because the three routes are not equivalent and the difference between them is not visible unless you know the three forms of words. For the purposes of reading a label, the practical instruction is short. Find it, read which of the three it is, and read the life stage. Feeding directions are mandatory for any dog or cat food labeled complete and balanced, and the regulation sets a floor for what they must contain. They must be expressed in common terms, they must appear prominently, they must at minimum give the amount of a familiar household unit of product per weight of animal, and they must specify the frequency of feeding. Where a food is intended for use under veterinary supervision, a statement directing the owner to use it only as directed by their veterinarian may stand in place of feeding directions. What the rule does not require is that the directions be correct for your animal. They are a manufacturer's general guidance for an average animal of a given weight, and they take no account of neutering, age, breed, or activity. Overfeeding to the printed guide is one of the most common feeding errors there is, and the label is not the place to resolve it. The calorie statement is where the label gets genuinely technical, and it is worth understanding because it is the number that most directly affects an animal. Calorie content is stated in terms of metabolizable energy on an as-fed basis, and the regulation permits two routes to it. The first is calculation, using a formula the regulation prints in full. It is known as the modified Atwater formula, and it works from the crude protein, the crude fat, and the nitrogen-free extract, which is the carbohydrate fraction, itself derived by subtracting protein, fat, crude fiber, moisture, and ash from 100. Each of the three is multiplied by its own energy factor, and the results are summed. The second route is by testing procedures determined by AAF-SCO, and where that route is used, the label marks the figure as fed. Either way, the manufacturer must be able to provide an affidavit to the regulator substantiating how the figure was arrived at and where it was calculated. The summary data behind the calculation goes with it. The practical consequence is the same one that runs through this whole episode. A calculated calorie figure is arithmetic performed on the composition, not a measurement of the energy an animal extracted. It is a good estimate, and it is not a reading. Two smaller panels close out the established label. The manufacturer's name and address must appear. The distinction to notice is between manufactured by and distributed by, because they describe different relationships to the product. A company that distributes a food did not necessarily make it, and the plant that made it may also be making several competing brands, which is the subject of its own episode. Handling and storage instructions, where a product bears them, must appear under a bolded header separate and distinct from the feeding directions, and where graphics are used to support them, only graphics obtained from AAF-SCO's own website may be used at prescribed minimum sizes. A header is not required on small packages with a printable area below 40 square inches. The last change is the one most owners have not been told about, and it changes what a shopper sees. AAFSCO has adopted a modernized pet food label, and the centerpiece is a panel called Pet Nutrition Facts, deliberately built to resemble the nutrition panel on human food. The regulation prescribes it in detail, set off in a box by hairlines, printed in one color on a neutral contrasting background, with the heading centered at the top of the box in type twice the size of everything else in it, and the required elements in a fixed order. The contents are a real departure from the old guaranteed analysis. The panel opens with a familiar household unit, whether a can, a measuring cup, a treat, or a piece, consistent with the feeding directions, and its weight in grams. Then comes the calorie content per that household unit, and immediately beneath it, indented to show that they are components of the total, the calories contributed by protein, by fat, and by carbohydrate in that order. Then the guarantees, and here is the change that matters most. Protein and fat remain as minimums, but total carbohydrate appears as a maximum, calculated as 100 minus the sum of crude protein, crude fat, moisture, and ash. Dietary fiber appears indented beneath it as a component of that carbohydrate figure, replacing the old crude fiber guarantee. Moisture follows, and ash where it is declared. Carbohydrate has never been a required declaration on a pet food label. Working it out has until now been a technique an owner had to learn and perform themselves, and on the modernized panel it is printed. Alongside it, each nutrient is expressed not only as a percentage but as an amount per household unit, so a cup of food carries real quantities rather than concentrations. The transition is not quick. The modernized regulations were published in the 2024 official publication. States adopt them on their own timetables, and AAFSCO has recommended the discretionary period of 6 years, which places full implementation around 2030. For a buyer, the consequence is immediate and slightly awkward. For the next several years, the same shelf will carry both labels. Two foods sitting beside one another may present their composition in two different formats, one declaring crude fiber and one declaring dietary fiber and total carbohydrate, and neither is out of date or wrong. Knowing that both exist and which one is in your hand is now part of reading a label. The verdict on the front of the package is straightforward. It is not lying to you, and it is not telling you very much either. Its job is to create an impression that the rules will tolerate, and the rules tolerate a great deal, which is why the most useful thing printed on the front of a bag is the 2 or 3 words most people read as branding: the recipe, the dinner, the entree, the with. The back panel is where the regulator actually works, and it repays being read in an order rather than at random. So, practically, start with the product name and identify which tier it is using. A plain ingredient name is claiming 95%. A name with a descriptor such as recipe, dinner, entree, platter, or formula is claiming 25. A name using with is claiming 3. A name using flavor is claiming none at all, only that the flavor is present and its source is identified. Then turn the bag over and find the nutritional adequacy statement below the bold line. Read the life stage, and read which of the 3 substantiation routes the wording describes. Read the ingredient panel as an order and not as quantities, and remember that fresh meats are weighed with their water and meals are weighed without, so position on the list is not a ranking of protein delivered. Read the guarantees as a floor and a ceiling rather than as measurements. And if you are comparing a wet food against a dry one, do not compare the printed figures at all until you have taken the moisture out of both. Find the calorie statement and check it against the feeding guide, then check the feeding guide against your own animal rather than against an average one. Check whether the panel in front of you is the established guaranteed analysis or the new Pet Nutrition Facts box, because on the new one the carbohydrate figure you used to have to calculate is already printed. None of that requires expertise, and after the 3rd or 4th bag it stops taking any real time. It is the skill every other episode on this channel is built on, because once you can read the panel yourself, you no longer have to take anybody's word for what is in the bag, including mine.